Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you mourned them every single day for 40 years? Welcome to the darkly fascinating world of the Victorians, a people remembered today for their buttoned-up morals and stiff upper lips. But behind the lace curtains and polite society rules lurked an obsession far more intimate and unsettling: death. Not just the passing of life, but its ritualization, its symbolism, and its constant, unflinching presence in everyday Victorian existence. And no one embodied this morbid devotion more than Queen Victoria herself. After the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, she didn't just grieve, she built her entire life around his absence. She wore black every single day for 4 decades, kept his room untouched, and plunged the entire court into mourning. Her personal loss reflected a broader cultural movement, one in which grief was not private, but profoundly public and governed by a labyrinth of social codes. In the Victorian era, death wasn't just a moment, it was a lifestyle. With sky-high mortality rates, mourning became an almost continuous state of existence, and just like every other corner of Victorian life, it came with strict rules of etiquette. Failing to follow these protocols wasn't merely a faux pas, it was a moral failure. Victorian society developed an astonishingly elaborate system to deal with death. And while some customs, like serving a meal after a funeral or placing flowers around the deceased, still persist today, many others faded into the shadows of history, remembered only in dusty photographs and antique mourning jewelry. In today's episode, we're uncovering the eerie, often bizarre death traditions of the Victorian era, from tear vials and mourning garb to sleeping in the same room as a corpse. Let's begin. In the age before smartphones, photography was rare and expensive, an event, not an everyday act. So for many Victorian families, the first and last opportunity to capture a loved one's image came only after death. This practice, known as post-mortem photography, involved dressing the deceased in their finest clothes and sometimes posing them with the living, propped up, eyes painted open, made to appear as if merely sleeping. These haunting portraits weren't seen as macabre, they were cherished keepsakes, often the only physical memory a family would ever have of someone lost. It was not uncommon for grieving relatives to scrape together money after a death just to afford this final photo, one last snapshot of a now broken family. Mourning wasn't just a phase, it was practically a profession. Especially for women, the death of a loved one meant years of sartorial sacrifice and social withdrawal. The respectable Victorian widow had to observe 3 distinct stages of mourning. The first, known as deep mourning, lasted a year and a day, during which she wore black from head to toe, including a heavy veil known as widow's weeds. The second stage, secondary mourning, extended another 9 to 12 months, allowing the veil to be lifted, though the black clothing remained. And finally, half mourning brought some visual relief. Muted colors and black accents were permitted, but no vibrant hues or joyful patterns. Even distant relatives could find themselves bound by mourning etiquette for up to 2.5 years. With the ever-present threat of illness and death, many Victorians spent large portions of their lives dressed in black. To manage it all, publishers released special mourning manuals that outlined everything from how to behave to what to wear, and even what foods were appropriate during different mourning phases. Among the most curious of mourning customs were tear vials, delicate glass bottles called lacrimatories. Mourners, especially women, would collect their tears in these tiny vessels during funerals and wakes. The dried contents were later presented to the grieving family as proof of devotion and sorrow. But these were more than tokens, they also served as emotional timers. Once the tears inside had evaporated, it was said that mourning could properly end. Victorian homes treated death with solemn vigilance. Once a person passed away, they were not left alone for a moment. A constant watch was maintained beside the body, often in the parlor, the very room where the family had once entertained guests. Why the vigil? Some said it eased the deceased's journey into the afterlife. Others cited more practical reasons, to ensure the person was truly dead, to guard against rats, or to welcome guests arriving at odd hours. Regardless, this ritual reinforced the idea that death was both sacred and social. One of the strangest customs involved shrouding mirrors and portraits in black cloth. Victorians feared that a spirit could become trapped inside a reflective surface, or worse, pull a living relative in with them. To prevent this supernatural mishap, anything shiny was covered, plunging the home into an atmosphere of solemnity and shadow. Seeing your reflection in a home where someone had just died? That was considered a grim omen. You could be next. Though funeral homes existed, they served mainly as embalming facilities. The actual funeral took place in the family's own parlor. Friends and neighbors would come by to pay respects, offer condolences, and often stay with the body until burial. Since embalming wasn't fully modernized and arsenic was still used as a preservative, decomposition set in quickly, especially in the heat of summer. Flowers weren't just beautiful, they were functional. Their fragrant presence helped mask the smell of decay, turning them into an essential part of any wake. The connection between flowers and funerals persists today, though their purpose is now purely symbolic. Keeping a loved one close after death took a literal turn with mourning jewelry. These pieces weren't just worn in memory of the deceased, they often contained them. Locks of hair were braided into necklaces or sealed beneath crystal in rings. Teeth, bone, and even ashes were occasionally incorporated into wearable mementos. Every detail held meaning. White enamel signaled the death of an unmarried woman. Pearls stood for the loss of a child. These tokens of remembrance were worn not in secrecy but with pride, as declarations of love and loss. Victorians were deeply superstitious, especially around death. Clocks were stopped at the moment someone passed to symbolically freeze time and prevent death from claiming another family member. The deceased was carried out of the house feet first to avoid summoning more death. And all family photos were turned face down, lest a wandering spirit possess the living through their image. Every ritual, no matter how strange, had one purpose: to protect the living while honoring the dead. Before the Victorian period, burials happened close to home, often in churchyards. But with the growth of cities and rising death tolls, public cemeteries became the norm. As burial grounds expanded, so did the Victorians' desire for elaborate grave markers, towering headstones, crypts, and weeping angels. Death became an art, a monument, a legacy etched in stone. Today, we often avoid thinking about death. We keep it behind closed doors, hidden from polite conversation. But perhaps we could learn something from the Victorians. For all their odd rituals and somber clothes, they understood the power of remembrance. They knew grief was a process, not an inconvenience to be rushed, but a sacred act of love. So maybe, just maybe, their eerie customs weren't so strange after all.